Hello, you're listening to Hear This Idea, a podcast showcasing new thinking in philosophy, the social sciences, and effective altruism. In this episode, we talked to Habiba Islam, who is a member of the 80,000 Hours Career Advising Team. Before that, she worked as the Senior Administrator for the Future of Humanity Institute and the Global Priorities Institute at Oxford. And before that, she qualified as a barrister and worked in management consulting. If you've been meaning to get more serious about planning out a high-impact career or switching into one, then the first half of this conversation is for you. Habiba basically guided us through some key questions to ask yourself when you're beginning to plan the next stage of your career, and just gave a bunch of really useful advice. Then we talk a bit about Habiba's job as a career advisor and how 80,000 hours are helping people start off on careers aimed at having a really big positive impact, such as by giving free one-on-one career coaching calls. One thing to highlight here is that the 80,000 Hours Career Advising Team wants to speak to more people than ever before. So if you're at a stage where you think that you could benefit from, let me just say it again, free one-on-one career advice, then you can go to 80,000hours.org/HTI. That's 80,000 hours, the number, and you can sign up for a call there. And that link is also in the show notes, by the way. Oh, and 80K are also looking to actually hire a new career advisor, so you should totally apply to that if you think that you might be a good fit. And there is a link in the description for that also. In the second bit of the conversation, we talked about what motivates Habiba in her own work, and in general, just about different kinds of motivations for working on long-termist cause areas, especially things which appeal to our sense of justice and fairness, as well as just bringing about the best consequences. And near the end, we asked Habiba about the case for aiming high, and why, if you want to do as much good as you can, then it can make sense to try being way more ambitious than you might have thought. And I think that's really worth hearing. Okay, without further ado, here's the episode. Habiba, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So, a lot to talk about, but I thought we'd begin just by talking about what it's like to get career advising, because you are a career advisor at 80,000 Hours. So maybe your first question is, if you could just imagine someone listening to this, maybe decides maybe pretty soon to sit down and really think seriously about their career plans for a high impact career for the first time. What in general does beginning that process of career planning look like?
Yeah, so it might be slightly different from the kinds of things that you often hear as kind of careers advice. If you're thinking about this from the perspective of wanting to plan a career that's going to have a lot of impact, that sort of throws up a few other considerations. So I guess I'd suggest that people start off from this big picture view of working out what it is that they want out of their career. And everyone has various different personal priorities as well as kind of priorities that are impact-wise. But getting clear on what those are, and then digging into this question of what impact actually means for you, so that you have a sense of what it is that you're trying to get towards. So that's those kind of abstract, slightly more big picture things are really helpful to set the scene. And then when you're thinking specifically about career planning, it seems useful to sort of think a little bit backwards from where you might be wanting to head, what those kind of longer term potential paths for you might be, not in really concrete detail at this stage. You probably won't be able to predict with a lot of accuracy exactly what your job is going to look like in 40 years time or something, but getting a sense of where you might be heading. And then trying to work out what some of your uncertainties might be about how to get from here to there, and how you might make progress on those.
So you mentioned having a positive impact there. When we sit down and start thinking about how to have a positive impact with our career, how should we reflect what exactly we mean by positive impact?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree that it seems like both an important question and a hard question. And I think what this translates to in the real world and for your career is going to be a bit to do with what you think about various ethical considerations or your moral view, and also a bit to do with empirical stuff about the state of the world, and what kind of situation you actually find yourself in. And both those things can be a bit complicated to get a handle on, but it seems worthwhile at least spending some time just trying to put some words to what your feelings are here, at least as just a starting point. And I think I have found this surprisingly valuable as an exercise to do in the past myself as well, because I sort of maybe went through life sort of vaguely having a sense of what I thought I meant by this, even having like studied moral philosophy and like been aware of effective altruism, but actually trying to write down what I thought was quite clarifying in that you might just like be able to put words to some things that you do have some level of clarity on, and then just naming some of the things that you're uncertain about as well.
Yeah. I guess one question I have here is, I can really imagine hearing that and thinking, well, I definitely know I care about particular things, right? Like I really care about climate, and I really care about ending factory farming or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can list out those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it really difficult to figure out what they have in common, if anything. How might I go about figuring out if there is some kind of underlying or more fundamental, like ethical view that's kind of connecting those things?
Yeah, that is really tricky. I think it's very tempting to be able to point to things in the world that are concrete examples of like, that seems good and that seems bad. And also specifically when people are coming at this from like a career planning perspective, it's often very easy for people to be already filtering with a sense of like, what are things that I feel like I have any chance of affecting with my career at all? And I think it is somewhat helpful to try and do a little bit of abstraction, at least try and put yourself in the headspace of trying to work out what it is that sort of might fundamentally matter. I guess one helpful thing is that you don't have to do this completely by yourself. There's hopefully some, there's other people who've thought about this as well. Maybe there are groups or communities who have ideas that would resonate with you. So you can, for example, look at the 80,000 Hours website. We have an article on what we mean by social impact, impartially construed. And that might give you some like prompts for your thinking. And you can see which bits of that you agree with and which bits you disagree with. And if you're part of the sort of wider effective altruism community, there's like a ton of resources out there as well in like some, intro fellowships and things like that talk about this. So I guess that's one thing is you could like read some other things and like reflect on those and like chat to other people. But what is it that you're actually doing here? I mean, you can kind of reflect. In some ways, the only way you're going to get like some answer to your sort of moral intuitions is a bit of like reflecting through your own intuitions, kind of maybe some thought experiments to try and get a sense of what it is that you that's kind of underlying your views here. Does that seem like that gets to the thing that you're asking, Finn?
Yeah, no, totally. I think so. I think, just speaking personally, there's some pattern where, I can start off by naming particular things that seem really good, right? And things that seem really bad. And then when I reflect on the reasons, then I can kind of maybe figure out some kind of abstract thing that's going on, which explains why I think they're good and bad. But then you get this thing that once you have the more abstract thing in mind, you can use that as a starting point to figure out new things which you kind of didn't previously consider that you might actually consider working on, right? So I just want to say in general, it seems like a really useful process to kind of go step back and then kind of step forwards again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I mostly was talking a bit about this kind of the moral element of it as well, which is something that you can get a grasp on possibly just like by sitting down and having a think. Although it's helpful to sort of like read things that other people have written as like prompts. But then there's this whole other empirical bit as well around what positive impact in the world today might mean to you, which I think you can't really work out from just like thinking by yourself. You really do have to like look at the world around you and sort of see, do you really believe that there are actually like different interventions that some of them could be, 100 times more effective than others? And does that make a difference to which kind of areas you think it's more valuable for people to throw their efforts behind, things like that, I think. I think in general, one of the things I really like about the effective altruism community specifically, and other kind of intellectual communities have this too, is that we can make progress on these kinds of questions together, and you really don't have to work out them by themselves. And there's like hopefully other like guided resources that could take you through some of this, and you can see what other people think.
Yeah, although like one point that I really liked you having made at the beginning was, I guess, this like emphasis on like, setting explicit time out for doing this and like kind of doing this yourself and like actually writing down these answers yourself or like speaking to somebody else about this and really thinking about it rather than necessarily, right? Just like kind of referring or like identifying with a certain like label, and then like just assuming that that is like kind of done here. So thinking there's like definitely a big difference maybe between like saying that like I am an environmentalist and therefore I want to work on climate versus well, why do I care about climate, and then working out like the fundamental reasons why, and then like either just like being able to reflect on this and then understand like what is like truly motivating you behind that. Yeah, and possibly doing that like throughout like different courses and stuff just seems like for me like really useful on just like reflecting and not really understanding what you're implicitly doing until you like write it out or talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think people can come to, for example, the climate example with lots of different motivations. I mean, maybe you might come to it from a sense of like of thinking that the environment has value itself, and it's actually like very like maybe like the environment has rights, or maybe the environment has like worth independent of out of humans, and it would be really bad for us to destroy it. Or maybe you're coming at this from a completely different perspective, which is like actually fundamentally the thing that I care about is like humans or animals suffering, and if we destroy the environment, that's bad, because then it means like there's going to be real people who are having to live through like droughts and floods and extreme weather events and that kind of thing. So there can be, I think there's like people within the environmental movement who might have the very different takes on this kind of thing, and it seems helpful for you to like tease that out yourself.
Yeah. One like last question I have on this point is like, I guess just maybe thinking about this either through cases that you've seen or like even like for yourself, like how much clarity do you expect people are able to like make on this? I guess especially when people are doing this like for the first time and stuff, especially when we're thinking about like really deep like moral foundational questions and stuff. Like these are definitely ones that I'm like constantly like iteratively like still updating on or like still super uncertain on. And at some point you kind of have to make career decisions and like start on like what seems like a good kind of first output here, or what feels like a good first step to be able to think about this in terms of your career.
Yeah, I mean, you and me both, Luca. I still feel like I am learning and developing my views on ethical considerations. I think that you want to. It's helpful to get some sort of bounded sense of what the space is here, and if you can get a sense of at least certain things that you're like relatively confident are sort of part of are like things that might matter, and maybe there are some other things that you're like less certain about, but at least you sort of like you have like already kind of started to stratify the space here a bit. I think like identifying things that you want to like carry on thinking about or learning about or diving into a bit more just seems great, but at least like knowing what those things are seems like a good starting point. So maybe the thing that would be like a good output is being able to write like a little paragraph, a few sentences of certain things that you sort of like, like your best guess right now, and maybe then a bullet points of the things that you're most uncertain about.
Yeah, maybe this will come up later as well, but I feel like I want to say this is one example of the unreasonable effectiveness of just setting a timer to go and think about something. I guess often it might feel like, well, everything I kind of can know about these, deep seeming questions about what's best overall, I probably just already do know because it's obvious. And then everything else is just mysterious and I'll never know. But when you set a half an hour timer and really sit down to think about things and to learn what you, try resolving uncertainties, and I think you can get quite a long way. At least I feel like I could when I tried doing that. So at the start, you mentioned the next chunk of work when you're sitting down to plan out a high-impact career for the first time is something like thinking now about what problems in the world actually look most pressing, given what you've kind of, what matters in the abstract. So maybe a question is, where can you begin to look to start thinking about that question, and what kinds of considerations are important to bear in mind here as well?
So for getting started on this question of trying to come up with a list of the most pressing problems, again, I think like turning to other groups, other people's opinions you respect, or other like intellectual communities to get like a short list or somewhere to get started seems pretty good. So for example, in 80,000 Hours, to give a bit of a little plug, like we have a page of like, problem profiles where we have set out which kind of problems we think might be the most important. I think this isn't the only list that you could start with. You could look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or like what progress studies economists think, or just other kinds of intellectual communities that you think are that sort of seem to be like pointing at trying to do something that seems good for the world, or just the wider effective altruism community and the different kinds of problem areas that people focus on there. And I think that gives you like a starting point. I think that something that seems something that seems kind of true to me is that this kind of there is quite a difference between which problems seem more pressing compared to others, particularly considering just like how high stakes some things might be, given this kind of the scale of what's going on in the world right now, and so that might be something that differentiates problems quite significantly from other ones. When you actually get to the fine-grained level of, well, what is it actually that I'm going to do with my job? What's the organization that I'm going to work with? What's the kind of like angle that we have on this problem? There's still going to be a bunch of different variation between different things like that, even within the same problem. I mean, just think about climate change again as an example. There are just like tons of different people trying to work on this in like many different ways. So it's definitely going to be a bit of a first step kind of broad brush approach to try and look at problems as a whole, to try and get a sense of which ones are like seem more important than others. But I think even at this level, even if you think that there's like within problem variation, it still seems worthwhile to be able to kind of like separate out different clusters of problems. So you might think that you want to be looking for like global problems rather than like local ones, because those are going to be bigger in scale. You might be wanting to look for things that have the stakes are sufficiently high that we're dealing with like large groups of people or large groups of animals, maybe even looking towards things like factory farming, or even like future generations as being kind of like large groups that are being affected. And like you might want to think about things like the relative neglectedness, and this could be like, how many people are working on this problem might be another way of like separating these clusters out, to at least giving you like a first indication of where you want to focus your efforts. Bearing in mind that within the problem there'll be like some ways of attacking the problem that are much better than others.
Yeah, so I guess like a lot of this conversation has so far focused on this like, somewhat like intellectual exercise of like working out how impactful or important certain like cause areas are, kind of in this like abstract sense. But then there's also this like really just like real world personal component of like you are then going to have to work on this cause or like doing this function or doing this job. And 80K, it's in the name. You will kind of be allocating like 80,000 hours of your time there. And hopefully you want that to also be time that is like really fulfilling or just like really enjoyable and stuff there. And we talked to, I think, Ben Todd previously around this like idea of career fit. But I'm wondering, when you're kind of like planning your career, like how should you think about this aspect, especially how should you maybe like think about trading this off with working on something that like seems more impactful or important, but might not be, the thing that like immediately strikes you as the best fit or the most enjoyable like day to day. Yeah, like for somebody just starting off thinking about this, what should they be thinking of?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it's just like, it's definitely the case, this kind of like finding a career that is a really good fit for you, that you're going to find motivating for the long term, is a really important part of the equation, definitely. I think there is, to pick up on a couple of points around how to trade this off. So I think one of the reasons why I want to focus so much, at least I'm setting the scene on thinking about problem areas that you might want to work on, are in part because to sort of level the playing field a bit, I think a lot of other careers advice out there basically only focuses on like find the thing that you love. And so it seems helpful to have a bit of a counterbalance and like try and focus on the impact side of the problem a bit more. There's also, I think, a tendency for people to sort of, if they're thinking mostly about the personal fit, to mostly consider roles that they are aware of, that seem like similar to things that they've already had some experience of, that sort of are maybe areas that they're a little bit more familiar with. And maybe putting yourself in this kind of more abstract headspace, thinking about the global problems, is really useful, because there very plausibly could be ways of working on those problems that wouldn't come immediately to mind. So for example, you could always earn to give, and then you can be funding, go to get a high paying job and earn extra money so that you can be donating it to work on one of these problems. And that can work on any problem. So there's like possibly a way of like working on any different problem through that. Similarly, through advocacy, and like various ways of doing like research or policy, maybe like relevant to lots of different problems, or even something like if you have really good organizational skills or entrepreneurial skills, you can like run an organization or start something new, which just may be very applicable to lots of different problems. So again, this is kind of part of why I think it's useful to do some of the like big picture problem thinking first, before you then switch into thinking about the personal fit. But I think once you've done the big picture problem thinking, and then you've kind of had to think about these different problems, which one seems important, what are the bottlenecks in those areas, what are the kinds of career paths that could be useful for making progress on these problems, then you get a sort of long list of potential careers. And at this point, I think this is where personal fit, this kind of which of these careers seem really fulfilling to me, really kicks in, because that's going to be one of the most decisive factors, I think, in picking between in the long list, because your career is going to be multiple decades long, like you said, 80,000 hours, and you're going to do your best work when you are really excited to get up in the morning, at least most of the days, and like do your best work harder, enjoy working with your colleagues, just find the work like motivating and enjoyable, and are really going to be doing your peak best work many decades in the future.
Yeah, there's maybe like a more basic question here, which I think you were like touching on at the end here, which is like when we use the word like personal fit or career fit and the like what exactly do we like even mean by that? We're definitely, when thinking back when I was like 18, it was really hard to know, like, without having tried it or without like having been there, of like, would I enjoy being an investment banker and trying to earn a lot of money? Would I enjoy being an academic? Like, what does like fit or something like even mean? Or like, what am I even good at? Are there maybe like any like signs or indications that you would like recommend people look out for, especially when they're like kind of just trying things out at the beginning and like I guess trying to evaluate like how good fits they are for certain positions?
Yeah, I'm extremely sympathetic to the fact that it's really hard to tell very early on, at least for lots of people. I think there are some people in this category who feel that something's just like really click for them, and they have like a particular, they did pure maths research at university. That's the best thing. Everything else is terrible. But I think for probably most people, it is really hard to get a very strong sense of being able to predict what is it that you're going to be really good at in like 20 years time, when you haven't had that much experience of many things outside of academia, usually at this early stage. I think it's also even once you start getting experience in internships or in your first job even, I think it's very easy to maybe misattribute how enjoyable you found that time to something around how good I am at that specific task, when it could just be to do with the other things that are going on in your like life in general. It could be about that specific role, it could be about the pandemic in this time, and so it's very easily confounded by a lot of other variables. So just to restate, that was all just to restate why I think it's a hard task, to actually try and answer your question about, therefore, how could you try and get started tackling this problem. I think you should, in the early stages of your career, you should really be putting yourself in this exploring mindset, and give yourself permission to try out different things and actually try them out quite wholeheartedly to see if they're going to be a good fit before you draw too strong conclusions. But you can be doing this by building up the amount of effort that you're putting into a particular area. So you start off, if you think something's kind of plausible, maybe start off by reading a bit about it, then talking to a bunch of people, then trying something out that takes a couple of weeks, and then maybe trying something out that takes like a few months, like an internship, and then trying for a job. And so at each stage, you're putting in a little bit more effort, and getting a bit more information about whether this works for you. To go back even one step before that, to work out which of these things you should even try, you can get some information from your work history or your studying history so far. You can sort of do something like an energy audit to look back over the last kind of month and work out which of the things that you did that you found really energizing, or you feel like you really got into a flow state or something like that. Or you could try and gather a bunch of feedback from other people who know you well, and try and work out what some of your particular strengths are, and see if you can like use that as an input into this kind of calculation around what might you be really good at in the future. We have like some more guidance on this on our website in terms of like articles on personal fit and also on like finding your strengths. But I think fundamentally this thing around the overarching structure might be something like try and get some like decently good guesses, and then do this thing of testing them out with increasingly more effort to get more information on each of them.
Yeah, cool. I feel like I maybe want to add, just speaking personally, that the little bit of advice you mentioned about figuring out when you notice that you fall most easily into a kind of flow state, that was really useful for me to think about. So I guess flow state meaning those stretches of time when you're working and the time just like flies by really quickly and you just get so easily absorbed and you're not very easily distracted. So yeah, here's a question I was meaning to ask. So it seems to me that often you can end up trying to decide between maybe two options, where one option looks like jumping in to work directly on a problem that you really care about. And another option looks like working on a kind of adjacent problem or something that's not totally related at all in order to gain experience and skills and connections, which you can then spend later on the thing you think is most important. So this is called transferable career capital. I guess I want to ask, how should people begin to think about weighing up those two kind of broad strategies when they're thinking about how to have the most impact through their career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good question. I think you might think that my own career went hard on the transferable career capital early on, in that I did like management consulting and got like very general skills. But I think possibly people can do better than I did. So if I were to sketch out this kind of what should you be thinking in terms of career strategy, it seems relatively helpful to think about having three different career priorities. So early on in your career, particularly, you might be wanting to focus on exploring different things. Then you might want to move on to really investing in yourself, building up skills, and so you become really good at a particular thing. And then you want to maybe switch into deploying those skills, actually like cashing it all in and doing a bunch of good. I've described those like they're sequential, but to be fair, at every stage in your career, you probably want to have like a bit of each of these, and they might be just like in relatively different proportions. So you might be like likely early on in your career weighted more towards exploration and then towards like investing in skills, and then likely later on switching into in deploying those and going for things that are directly impactful. So that said, I think for most people, it seems pretty useful to have in mind something that they might be wanting to do longer term and be really focusing early on building up that career capital. You might not want to build up just very broadly transferable career capital that could be useful for anything, which is kind of maybe what I did with consulting. You might want to be a bit more specific, and you might want to build up quite targeted career capital. So specifically in the area of like economics of AI, or specifically in the area of like building nonprofits that are long-termist focused or something. So that's the general advice is probably as a whole, you should be thinking about exploring and then developing career capital. But that said, even early on in your career, you should definitely be keeping an eye out for outstanding kind of opportunities to be able to be doing a ton of good, even just at this early stage in your career. And it is just the case that there are a bunch of these kinds of opportunities that do crop up. So like maybe many of your listeners may be in the position where they're able to get like a junior entry level role at like a really impactful nonprofit or an AI safety company or something. And they're able to like be the best person for that role and fill that niche and start getting a bunch of experience, as well as being able to do a bunch of good early on. So if you can get something that ticks both boxes, the career capital and also the direct impact, that seems great. So don't like rule those options out, but don't necessarily put too much pressure on yourself to be definitely looking for those early on.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to like follow up on that aspect here as well, right? Because when you're, I guess, broadly talking about building up career capital, it's really about forcing you to take this like long-term perspective on your career. And likewise, if you're kind of aiming for like a senior, very specific position, and that is like your goal now, then that is also having to take like a long-term perspective to your career. And there seem to be like kind of two challenges to this. One is that you might just be super uncertain about like what it is you want or like what you think is most important, and it might turn out that like in 10 years your views are different or the world has changed and what have you, and actually things might no longer be the case, that this was like the right approach kind of post hoc. And then there's this like second aspect as well, which I feel like I could definitely relate and like resonated when you were talking about like management consultant and taking these routes to like build up career capital. That one of the things that I was like really concerned or worried about is that like my own preferences for what I think is the most impactful or the most important and like doing good in the world might change depending on the environment that you're in. And yeah, I'm just wondering if there are like is there any advice or guidance you would give people when they are like having to take this long-term perspective and having to like grapple with these aspects of it?
Yeah, I think it is really tricky, and it's definitely extremely tempting if you're operating under uncertainty to try and hedge as much as possible and to try and keep your options open for as long as you can. And in some ways just be kicking the can down the road for when you actually have to decide and then go all in on a particular area. I think a couple of things that are worth bearing in mind that might push against that instinct are that it's just very possible that being a specialist in a particular area is really valuable. And to become a specialist in a particular area, you're going to get a lot of gains by starting earlier. So if there's a chance that, if we need people to be professors in biopolicy and have a lot of like expertise in that area and credentials and respect and connections, they need to be starting on that path like pretty early. We can't all be kicking the can down the road. And so specifically this kind of this pushes even harder when you're thinking about coordinating with the community of other people. So instead of thinking so much from the perspective of like, what should I be doing with just my particular career, if you are able to sort of take a portfolio kind of view and consider yourself as part of like a group of other people who are all trying to do good together, it maybe seems a bit more reasonable. You can maybe relax a bit about, let's all specialize in slightly different things, and trust that even if my particular thing isn't like quite perfect or something, as a community we're investing in the right kind of mix of different areas, and so as a group we're going to do better. Certainly better if people are sort of specializing in their niches rather than everyone trying to be a bit of a generalist. And so a couple of those things maybe push against this sort of natural tendency to try and like keep your options open. So it's still hard though. I think it may feel like you have to make some calls quite early on about which direction to go in. I guess this means that it's particularly useful if you can try and front load some of the investigation to get to sort of narrow down your uncertainties as much as possible. So perhaps during university or in the first few years, trying to like focus in on what would be the biggest thing that would change your mind and which direction to go in. But I think in some ways, I think I'm just like, I think it would be really great if people felt valued and empowered to do the thing that ex ante seems like a very reasonable thing for a bunch of people in the community to do, even if ex post, different things come to light or something that change people's minds.
One impression I kind of want to run by you is that like the more I've seen just like professionals or people like more senior on in their career, it's like really surprising to see just like how much people have been able to switch, like even in their like late 20s, mid 30s, like what kind of have you, and like pretty drastic career decisions, which was definitely very different to like what my impression of a career was again when I was like 18 or at university, where it kind of felt like you choose your subject and then that has like already like really narrowed it down, and then you choose your first job and that has really narrowed it down. And these decisions do seem like really, really important. I definitely don't want to like diminish that, but like I think the point is here somewhere that like having decided to like specialize or like go down a route, as long as you do like really cool, awesome work down that route, like doesn't narrow things down as much as you expect. Like people are able to like value achievements and work, and you can make like really drastic changes in your career like later on. We've definitely had like guests on in the past as well who've I think like really exemplified that.
Yeah, it does take the pressure off the decision if you, any specific individual career decision, if you realize that this isn't all or nothing. This isn't like irrevocable. Yeah. This is like an incremental change in the direction that you're going in.
Cool. So we've just talked about, from a super kind of bird's eye view, what it looks like to really start thinking about planning out a kind of high impact career for the first time. Now, it turns out that 80,000 hours are all about this, right? You have a bunch of resources on the website which help people think this through, go into a lot more detail about the things you've just mentioned. But also, 80,000 hours offers one-on-one career coaching. That's what you do, for free, by the way. So yeah, what does that involve? What does that look like?
Yeah, so people can apply on our website, and then if it seems like we're well placed to help you, then we'll offer a video call, which is, like you said, completely free, and just talk through some of the thoughts that you've got on career planning at this stage. So we can talk through things like the problems that you're thinking of working on, the different options that you're considering, and the next steps that you're thinking about right now, and see if we can help.
Cool. And do you have like a profile, or like who are the types of people who should be like reaching out? Like who are you most excited to get to speak to?
So we talk to people at all different stages of their careers, from undergraduates to people who are later on in their career and already have experience, are already experienced professionals. We talk to people who have at a different ranges of thinking about their careers, from being like very early on and not really having like a good idea about exactly which thing is the right fit for them, even to talking to people who are already on a particular path and want to see if they can do that even better or have an even more of an impact on that path. Specifically, I think we're most excited to talk to people who are engaging really seriously with this idea of doing the most good with their career and are like engaging with the kind of like analytical approach that 80,000 hours takes, and particularly have some familiarity and interest in the kinds of problems that 80,000 hours talks about on the website.
What do you think people really get out of one-on-one calls? Where are they like really most valuable?
Yeah, it's actually just like a wider range of things than people might naturally expect from careers advising. It's like, it's not very much focused on like specific advice often. It's actually just like covers a ton of different things. So it can be talking through course prioritization and like some moral philosophy with someone who shares your values and can kind of point you in the direction of other resources or talk through some confusions. Can also be like specifically talking about the different career options that you're considering, giving you a sense of what those look like, and acting as a bit of a guide to the different areas, talking about what the routes in might be and helping you weigh up which ones seem most valuable, maybe even putting more things on the table that people hadn't even considered so far yet. And there's also a big part that seems valuable about making further onwards connections, being able to introduce people to experts in the areas that they're interested in or hiring managers. And often those connections are the thing that really last for a long time after the call. We've had great examples of people, finding their collaborators and then going on to work in the particular project with them. And then there's a bit around, just specifically helping people work out some specific next steps, turning something into like an actionable plan that they're actually going to be able to do, pointing them in the direction of like specific jobs or funding opportunities or resources or events to go to. And this like overarching thing maybe around, it's just kind of nice to talk to someone who shares your values and is thinking about things similarly to you, and maybe like can provide a bunch of encouragement, especially if other people in your immediate circle, like family and friends, aren't so familiar with this way of thinking about careers, and maybe think it's like a bit more unusual to be thinking about something like AI safety or like caring about future generations or something like that. And so it just can be like a really helpful just like a helpful person to talk to for a bit of general like validation and encouragement.
Totally.
Yeah, fab. And maybe to go down like memory lane a bit, I've got a document open on my laptop, which was from the 16th of July, 2020, which is, I think, when we had our first call, Habiba, for my career advisor session. And I remember we would talk through like loads of different career perspectives. Like kind of going back now, it's like crazy what I was considering. Is like everywhere from like going into like earning to give to running for political office to like doing academic research and like what have you not. But I remember one of like the really awesome like benefits I got out of those conversations was, I think you just followed up with like introducing me to people doing these jobs, and I had like this wonderful month where almost like every week I had a call to look forward to with like somebody just willing to spend an hour of their time with me, just walking me through my questions, like giving me like a very first introduction into like all of these different fields and stuff. And yeah, I found that like incredibly valuable, and definitely big plug that it is an insane amount of value that you can get essentially for free when you're like stuck with these questions and need somebody to talk to or make progress on these things. Like it definitely made a really big difference for me.
Yeah, I will say as well from my own memory. So I spoke to, I think, a volunteer who was helping do these kind of career talks, but wasn't working for 80K. But we did go through all the 80K material. I got so much out of it. I was just kind of thinking then when Luca was speaking, what did I get out of it most? And I feel like, so the thing you mentioned, Habiba, that there's just a lot of value from feeling like someone kind of actually just cares about what you end up doing and like is willing to, put in time to like actually help you. That just felt really cool. Kind of like embarrassing. Like, oh my God, someone's actually putting in their own time to like help me. And there's no strings attached, right? They just care about helping people get cool, high impact careers. But also there were like much simpler benefits. So like I'm doing pretty much everything I'm doing now, I'm pretty sure I would have had no idea existed before those conversations. So just like learning that certain routes exist, really important, because almost certainly some of the coolest routes that people can follow will not be the kinds of things that they'll hear about from, for instance, their parents or their teachers often just like a 10-second Google. But honestly, maybe the best part of doing the career chats for me was like, just because it was the first time I'd sat down to think seriously about what I want to do beyond like a 2-month time frame, like in my life. And there's just some value from like carving out the space, like a structured space, to just sit down and do that planning exercise. And it goes, I think I mentioned it before, right? This is just like unreasonable effectiveness to setting a timer and like doing this thing and getting someone to help you with it. So yeah, also found it extremely valuable, and possibly is a reason I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Maybe turning the tables and just asking, what is it like on the other end, like being a career advisor and such? Like, how is it for you going through this process or guiding people through this process?
Yeah, it's a really nice job to have because I get to talk to altruistic, talented people who really care about helping others and just get to try and help them with their careers and are able to, and hopefully I'm able to help them by being able to sort of, like say useful things to them and like connect them up with other people. So it's a really nice job to have in that it's both fun and nice being able to like talk to people and also just like, I really feel good about the impact that I'm having in being able to help people to get into even more high impact roles. It's great. The team is lovely as well. So it's like a really nice kind of team to work with, 8,000 hours.
One thing I'm interested in is just the numbers here. So can you say how many calls ADK is managing to do per year these days? And also, are there any updates on whether you plan to scale up the operation?
Yes. So we are absolutely in the phase of wanting to very much increase the amount of calls that we're doing, increase the size of the one-on-one team, and increase the number of calls that we're able to do. So last year we did over 830 calls, which was like a record-breaking year for us. That was the most calls that we've done in a year in the whole kind of 10 years that 8,000 hours has been around and doing this kind of thing. But we're planning to beat that even more this year and aiming for something like over 1,200 calls this year. We also part of the reason why we're able to do that is that we hired a couple of new advisors to the team, Alex Lawson and Matt Reardon, last year, who started, and we're also hoping to hire even more people this year. So very much really excited about helping more and more people, and excited to scale up what we're doing.
Yeah, just quickly, out of curiosity, are you like hiring at the moment, or is there any positions that people who might have heard how cool it is to be a career advisor like want to apply this for themselves?
Yes, we are absolutely hiring people right now. So there is a job description that we have on our website and an application form. If people are interested, do check that out and put in an application. We'd love to hear from people, even if you're like a little bit uncertain about whether this is for you or not. There's very few people who've done a careers advising role precisely like this before. Like I did consulting and operations before, and someone else on the team was a teacher. So if this seems like the kind of thing that you might be interested in, then definitely do check it out.
And are you able to give some kind of maybe anonymized example of a career change that you think there's a good chance either you or someone on the advising team are actually responsible for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the earliest calls that I did was with someone who was doing a PhD on AI regulation and had come across a bit of the discussions around Nick Bostrom's work and superintelligence, but was interested in this area a bit more. And so we were able to connect him up with some other folks interested in this who were in the process of setting up the Legal Priorities project. Which is now a fully fledged organization with a research agenda and like a fellowship scheme. The person that we introduced to them was a fundamental part of like spinning that up and making that happen. And then we also, through kind of staying in touch over the years, have helped them out with their career. And they're now sort of been doing like a policy internship at DeepMind. And this was one of the cases of, just doing a lot of being able to do these kind of introductions and like link people up with other people who are thinking about similar things was really helpful in their career.
Changing gears a bit, I would be super keen to maybe hear a bit more like specific career advice that like some like listeners might be wanting. So I maybe propose that we could do like kind of a quick fire round where I will like just propose like some category or somebody who might be like struggling with their career at the moment, and you can tell me any like hot takes you have or anything that they might keep in mind. The first of which is kind of considering students. So this might be people who have just finished university or just now thinking about like what is the first job that they want to be doing like out of education. What should they be thinking about? Is there anything like specific you want to advise there?
Yes. So I think the general focus being on exploring paths that seem like they could be really high value, but keeping an eye out for like exceptional opportunities for impact. I think some specific things that come to mind could be a really good time to be doing community building in universities. And there's a big push that the Center for Effective Altruism has been doing recently around having campus specialists in universities. Just seems like a key time that people get involved in these ideas. And so if you're able to run a really good university group, that could be just like an incredibly high impact thing to do. Beyond that, potentially doing like junior operations roles, even being like a personal assistant or something like that for people who are doing really incredibly important work, could be a great thing to be doing early on. You often have like a bit of leeway maybe to do something like a little unusual or a little different before settling down into like a more formal career, particularly if you go back to doing like a master's or something like that. You have a bit of a grace period before then to do something like particularly exciting.
Awesome. And maybe thinking like even before that, so like imagining high schoolers or people who are possibly just thinking about applying to university and just even choosing like what they want to study. What are like the big questions that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, tricky. I think at this really that early on, when you're thinking about your major, I would try not to overthink the thing that you're going to be doing later on in your career, or the thing that you think is like definitely the most impactful at this stage. There's some, maybe you might want to pay attention to some like are probably more likely useful to pay attention to things that you think you're going to really enjoy and be really good at university and going to get really good grades, because those are going to be those are going to stick with you and like hopefully be just useful credentials for later on. I think bearing in mind that also you could be doing a bunch of other stuff that's really useful even at university that isn't just the studying that you're doing for your course. So also paying attention to doing like volunteering or like student organizing, or traveling or learning other things outside of your course. All these kinds of things can be just as valuable as the actual formal studying that you're doing as well. So paying attention to a rounded set of skills and exploration that you're doing early on, as well as kind of testing things that might be useful for your career, like trying out different internships and things.
Fab. And then last one from me is, are there any like specific like mentoring or like other resources for like women, non-binary or trans people?
Yeah, so I'm on the board of Magnify Mentoring, which formerly used to be called Wham Bam. But Magnify Mentoring is a mentorship network for people who are interested in effective altruism and interested in doing good, like I think particularly through their careers. They have a somewhat of a specific focus on people from slightly more underrepresented groups, and like historically had more of a focus on women and non-binary people and trans people of all genders. They now are open to, or at least piloting being open to people of all different backgrounds, but retain some of that kind of like some of the special focus on people from disadvantaged backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds.
So right at the start of the interview, you mentioned that one of the questions people might be interested in asking themselves was something about what they value most or what they think matters most. I'm kind of curious just to hear your personal answer on that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do have quite a mix of different things that go into this, but I think it's true to say that I think I have somewhat kind of pluralistic type, a lot of like kind of pluralist instincts. I think I'm not the kind of person who is very signed up to a specific view of maybe that like only consequences matter and only welfare, increasing welfare matters. I think that I have always been very pulled by considerations of justice and also of being a good person, I think. And so I have like a mix of these different things going on. I think what drew me to effective altruism in the early days was particularly this sense of being born into a really incredible amount of privilege, being from a middle-class family in the UK, and just having so many advantages and feeling a sense of that seems like way more than I need, like really unfair that there are lots of other people in the world that don't have those access to those opportunities that I do. And so I think in the early days when Giving What We Can had a sort of more global health focused pledge, that really spoke to that sort of that sense of kind of wanting to give back or wanting to help others who were potentially less fortunate than I was.
Cool, that's interesting. And I think I can definitely sympathize with a lot of those motivations, and I'm sure lots of people can as well. Which is not to say that presumably you're saying that everyone should feel these things, but there are lots of motivations for the same kind of work. But of course, a lot of the problem areas that 80,000 hours thinks might be unusually important or most important really revolve around this kind of long-termist perspective where you're thinking about influencing how things go, maybe over very long timescales. Yeah, and I'm curious whether you have thoughts about if you have this kind of these different motivations for doing high impact work in the first place, how might you frame this kind of long-termist work in terms of justice or fairness, as well as just, the best consequences?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this because I think the wanting to work on things that reduce the chance of a global catastrophe seems like a very sensible and good thing to do from lots of different perspectives. And I find that very reassuring. I think it is not a very unusual and strange or niche moral position that might lead you there. I think it actually very much speaks to a bunch of different instincts, including some that might be from a more sort of justice-focused framework. So I don't want to claim that these are decisive arguments or that I've fully represented all the arguments that there could be in this space. But I do want to give a bit more space for some of the arguments that speak to some of these justice-focused instincts, because I think they're very relevant, and I'm excited to see more a widening of the discussion in this space. One thing that is pretty straightforward is that if you're very much still within the consequentialist framework, then whatever you value, there's very plausibly more of it, a lot more of it in the future. And this just isn't just a utilitarian thing. This is if you care about people living happy lives and their welfare, it's very plausible that most of the people that you can affect are going to be in the future. But also if you just care about having discovering more inventions or knowledge or beauty or things like that, a lot of that is going to be in the future as well. So it's kind of straightforwardly, this is, we should not be thinking about safeguarding the future of humanity as just tied to utilitarianism. It's actually for many people with many different value frameworks, this seems like an important thing to be doing.
Cool. So sounds right that you certainly don't need to have a very narrow conception of what's valuable in order to buy into the kind of long-termist thing. So yeah, maybe there's another framing that you could speak to, which is you might especially care about representing underrepresented groups, and maybe there's some motivation for certain kind of long-termist work in terms of that idea of figuring out which kind of groups are least represented right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so this is something that speaks to a slightly different type of moral instinct or moral value that we might have. Because if you're coming from this kind of justice view of wanting to represent groups, it doesn't quite work to sort of say there's going to be more justice in the future because the future is bigger, because that's not exactly
right.
what the instinct is getting to. It seems like the instinct is a bit more about actually it's really important for us to be paying attention to the interests of groups that otherwise wouldn't be represented, and making sure that we act towards them maybe with fairness or something like that. And there's this long tradition of kind of civil rights and women's rights and LGBT rights as well, and those seem like important kind of moral progress that hopefully we've made bit by bit globally. But you might think that in fact there are the interests of actually billions or trillions of people who are future generations, where how their lives go, and in fact whether they get to live at all, really hangs in the balance based on what we do right now as the only generation that's alive right now. And it does seem like at the moment we barely take into consideration the effect that we would have on these people's lives. It doesn't come up very much in conversation when we're thinking about politics, when we're thinking about any kind of areas of lives in business, or even in barely in nonprofits, do we really pay attention to the effects that we might be having on these future people? And that at some point this starts to seem quite extraordinarily selfish, that we are maybe only prioritizing our own parochial kind of interests and completely failing to take into consideration what the effects might be on these people in the future. So a very straightforward example of this that I think speaks to a lot of people is climate change, for example. We're the ones who are creating all of this, all the problem. We're the ones who are polluting, and it's very plausibly not even our children, but maybe our grandchildren, maybe our grandchildren's grandchildren, who are going to still be living with the consequences of what we do, and we barely take that into consideration.
Yeah, like one thing I definitely want to add on here as well is that I do think you're seeing some of these discussions, like especially around like legal frameworks, or like the interview I'm kind of thinking of here is like with the Legal Priorities Institute, where just because you're dealing with law, like it is by nature kind of a discussion that's like very focused around like rights and justice, and outside of the normal like consequentialist spreadsheet EV type of calculations that's like maybe more associated with effective altruism. And yeah, like I think I would love to see definitely like more like justice flavored like long-term approaches, or like kind of having space there to flesh these ideas out as well. But that seems like one place to maybe start like having that conversation, or thinking about it.
Yeah. I do think that the concept of rights and of human rights is like, maybe you might point to this as an example of a success of kind of like moral philosophy or political philosophy, that this idea broke out of academia into the mainstream and actually has become a very important part of the way that we internationally think about what we ought to be doing. And just seems like a very plausible way that we should be thinking about future generations as well. There's actually just recently there's been a private member's bill by Lord Bird in the UK, which I believe has just been passed in the House of Lords.
Through the Lords, yeah. Yeah, the story of human rights is such a great thing to mention. You know, like 100 years ago, the kind of idea of some kind of very general sense in which all humans have the same rights was like much more foreign, much more alien. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Cool. So I can try to say what's running through my head hearing you say all this. And I take it you're saying something like, look, if you especially care about protecting the rights of future generations, then it does seem pretty obviously good to try to make sure that future generations don't have like really terrible lives. But there's another question which seems much trickier to me to think about, which is whether, in some sense, future generations have something like a right to exist or a claim to exist, and equivalently, whether in some sense you're depriving people of that right if they don't exist. Now, since a lot of long-termist inspired work revolves around trying to reduce the chance that some catastrophe means that people don't get to exist, then yeah, I'm curious how you think about how kind of rights and justice framing slot into the importance of reducing existential risks.
That is a great question. I'm not going to be able to do justice to the political philosophy of thinking about rights in this kind of context. I think this is going to be like tricky, and I'm sure there's like other people who've thought about this a bit more. I think I maybe want to make the sort of weaker claim that at least it speaks to the motivations for at least some people that even if we're not using kind of rights in a very like technical, like legalistic or term, that maybe it speaks to that at least their interests are interests that in some ways we nowadays should be paying attention to, the future people's interests. And I think that goes through the strongest if you're thinking about their like how their lives go, conditional on them having lives at all. So it feels very like this bites pretty hard when you're thinking about the possibility of us creating like dystopian scenarios for future generations,
right.
And like things like runaway climate change or totalitarian lock-in or something like that. And there, I think the instinct at least feels pretty strong that future people's interests and how their lives go seems to be the kind of thing that we ought to pay attention to. I think people maybe have different instincts about whether it really pulls on your moral intuitions, that these like future people might or might not get a chance to exist at all. And so here we're thinking more about like extinction events. And I think I do know some people who have very strong kind of total utilitarian kind of instincts, and also take the view that in a specific population ethics position, that it would be worse for a person to not exist than to exist. And I think for those people, I think it really does feel very strongly for them that it would be this immense tragedy if we didn't take into consideration these future people and they didn't get a chance to actually even live their lives, live lives. I think some people maybe don't feel that quite as strongly, and maybe I put myself a little bit in that camp, that I think the world would be better if they got a chance to live, but I'm not sure if it would be as bad for them. I know this gets into the weeds a little bit with a kind of technical population ethics question.
Yeah, we are not going to resolve those questions in this interview, but they're interesting one to think about.
do want to flag that I'm not a philosopher by trade, and I think maybe I would point people to, for example, Will MacAskill's book, where he'll be talking about this, I think, a bit more. His book that's going to be coming out quite soon, What We Owe to the Future. I think I just wanted to cover this off, at least because it speaks to potentially to some people's instincts that people might have in this space. I think it's worth noting.
It seems really worthwhile to me to think carefully about these framings as well, because I imagine there are some people who, approach these topics for the first time, see that the case is often framed in terms that they're less familiar with, in terms of these kind of consequentialist or even utilitarian flavored terms. And then they kind of bounce really quickly because it's like, whoa, that's not my scene, right? I kind of prioritize or care much more about these different things. Yeah, maybe another question is, there are some other framings of why you might care about, for instance, reducing existential risks and improving the long-term future in Toby Ord's book, The Precipice, that don't just reference, improving the expected value of the future, but also reference things like our duties generated by the past.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Toby included a bunch of these other arguments in The Precipice as well. I think I really appreciate the care that he took to present arguments that seem robust, but also speak to different things, not just the size of the future, but also maybe duties to past generations, or maybe sort of things around the kind of civilization that we want to be, or potentially our unique place in the universe. So specifically, one of the sections is around like the responsibilities that we might have arising from the past. In particular, maybe if your view is that we've committed as a species, we've committed some like terrible, grave injustices, maybe we have a duty to do something about that, to atone for those past injustices, and to make amends, potentially even. If that is in fact your view, you might think that it is a prerequisite of us being able to do that for us to at least continue to exist as a civilization,
right,
as
totally.
a species. And so safeguarding the future of humanity seems important for us to be able to get to a position where we can achieve the kinds of things that we actually ought to achieve from a justice perspective.
Yeah, cool. I really like that. One of the analogies I really like from that book is thinking about humanity as something like a kind of a person who is presumably quite early on in their life. And maybe they've done some things already which they really have come to regret. I can imagine like a teenager, right? Does a bunch of stuff, like stupid stuff when they're a bit younger. They get just about old enough to realize the kind of gravity of what they've done. And you can ask what would be best for them to do. It does feel like just giving up is the wrong answer. And even though in some sense you can't reverse certain kinds of harms, maybe the best thing to do is really just to get your act together and do as much good going forwards as you can, in order to, in some sense, kind of atone for what you've done. So yeah, if the analogy carries over, then that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and there are a couple of points where I think Toby takes this perspective of thinking about humanity as a whole, and like maybe doing an analogy of humanity as a whole or humanity as a species, as if it, as analogous to a person, and what would a person do in that situation. And I think those kinds of perspectives also seem to speak to somewhat similar instincts. Like I think if doing the expected value calculations on the size of the future doesn't float your boat, it doesn't really get to what you care about, then maybe some of these, like taking the perspective of humanity as a whole and getting a sense of, what kind of civilization do we want to be? Like maybe we want to be more prudent where we are right now. Maybe we want to be wiser. Maybe it seems better for us to be like modeling things like passing on the baton of the generations. All these kinds of like framings that I think Toby has in The Precipice, like plausibly speak more to people who have who are inclined to sort of feel like it's really like actually intrinsically good for humanity to be like doing the right thing, and kind of maybe speaks to some of these like justice instincts sometimes as well.
And maybe to stay on like wonky philosophy for a bit longer, like it could also just be that there are like lots of like seemingly plausible arguments, and you're kind of like unsure about like which worldviews or which like moral philosophical arguments like hold or are true, and like which ones aren't, right? And then this takes you like to the whole like moral uncertainty or like potentially like worldview diversification approach, where things that you mentioned before, things that seem like robustly good to like lots of these arguments, like maybe are just like more indicative that it actually just is good. and just exploring or like fleshing out more of these like types of arguments is just useful to make sure if we're like really confident about this thing rather than relying on like one crazy EV calculation.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think particularly you might think that if you're a bit like me and you like have a lot of these kind of consequentialist instincts, and also have some other instincts as well, you might think that it seems important for us to do the thing that will lead to the best consequences, but we want to keep some pretty strong check on making sure that we don't do something that is like that seems like really bad, like don't violate these side constraints, like pay attention to some of these like deontological constraints. And it's possible that you might think that you put some credence in these like the justice focus of like maybe helping people now, or something like that being like quite strong. And like maybe you might make the argument that those constraints are so strong that they should like take priority or something. But if you bear in mind this moral uncertainty, you should pay attention to the fact that if the welfare of these future people or other things that are happening in the future matters a lot, the stakes could be extremely high. And so you want to be maybe quite cautious about dismissing that view entirely, especially as you're weighing it up against some of these other like deontological side constraints or like other potential views that might push you in a different direction.
Yeah, like one way that I kind of like think about this, and I don't know if this is like either like completely flawed or like completely obvious, but I'm like going to go ahead and say it, is that like I often like relate it to this like post around, I think from GiveWell, around like cluster thinking versus like sequence thinking, which is like a very like consequentialist like post, right? Which is like, it's just trying to teach you how to do like good back of the envelope calculations or good like expected value calculations. But the point is that even if you just have a purely consequentialist like framework, it's just really hard to answer certain things, and often it's like more indicative that the right thing has like many kind of like independent arguments that point like in favor of it, rather than like one really elaborate or like one really detailed argument that might just like be, you know, one parameter can be wrong and then the whole thing kind of like falls apart. And that is like a very like consequentialist kind of approach, just because it's about like doing maths or like Botex or what kind of have you. But I think that for me kind of is like how I see like a lot of like the discussion around like moral uncertainty, or the importance of like engaging with these like different views and stuff, is because maybe it is like a way to check that you haven't missed anything, or like maybe it's a way to like make you more confident in this world where you have this moral uncertainty, or what have you. But I think it's interesting that like even from a consequentialist point, you can argue that this is like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for a more thorough examination of moral uncertainty from someone who really knows their stuff, maybe I'd point you in the direction of like an interview with Hilary Graves. So we have one on our 80,000 Hours podcast. But I think in general, I guess from my perspective, I think, one of the things that seemed really good about working on global health and poverty was that like basically everyone agrees that this is a really important thing to do. Like, you don't have to be a consequentialist to think that we should be helping other people more nowadays. And I think like I said early on, I think I do feel like I get a bunch of, it seems better to me that there are like other sensible reasons why we might find that safeguarding the future of humanity is actually a really important thing to do, that aren't just one particular theory says it's the most important thing to do.
Yeah, cool. So I guess I'm curious how you think people should approach, weighing between kind of good and bad motivations, or like pure and impure motivations for taking certain high impact jobs. And in particular, do you see places where people kind of go wrong in thinking about these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting question. Okay, so I think in replying to this, like the main bit of me that wants to reply is the like consequentialist Habiba,
Right.
who basically is just like, I kind of really want to make sure that these like global problems are solved.
Yeah.
And so as long as people are really dedicated to doing the thing that is actually going to be helpful, don't really care what's going on inside their minds. If they're gonna help other people, if they're gonna save people's lives, if they're gonna eliminate factory farming, if they're gonna like try and work on AI safety, all to the good. And actually, it would be helpful if people. It seems like extra helpful if people aren't unduly worried about being self-critical about what their own motivations are here. So I think that's one point. I think I would suggest that I think it is like somewhat important that people are like pointing at or aiming to get to the thing that seems really valuable. So even if their moment by moment or like day by day kind of motivations are like more to do with how much they enjoy their job or like wanting to impress their boss or whatever it is, if over the course of their career they are like in a cool moment when they think about what they want to do, are interested in having more impact or doing more good with their career, that seems important because that's going to be your kind of North Star or your guiding light that sort of like guides that where you go with your career. And if people don't have that and are like mostly motivated by something like I want to have like a fun job or something, it seems like even if they start off in a place that's doing something pretty good, it seems like unlikely they're going to stick at carrying on doing the thing that's the most impactful for every step of their career for the next kind of few decades or something. So I think I do care about people wanting to go for the thing that actually is particularly is like impactful, at least in some sense. Yeah, so I think those are my two responses.
Yeah, that seems totally fair. Like, I think it's just right to say that it's really hard sometimes to just maintain, the kind of ultimate pure motivation day to day. So you want to separate out, the kind of proximal day to day motivations from the kind of ultimate guiding motivations. Where it's totally fine day to day to forget that you're working on these problems for this like very profound, important reason, and just focus on what works in front of you and the kind of particular problems you're trying to figure out. That seems right to me. Cool. So maybe we can ask a last set of questions about being ambitious with your career if you want to aim at having an impact. And on that topic, it looks like things have kind of changed recently, where suddenly there seems to be like much stronger reasons for really thinking big about the kinds of ambitious projects and goals that you can get involved with if you care about doing good, having an impact. And so first question is, why is that? What's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think even taking like a really big picture view of what people have done in the effective altruism community over the last like 10 years or so, I think it just seems like people have achieved a ton of stuff. We've over the last 10 years, there's like Open Philanthropy has committed to be spending like billions of dollars on using the principles of effective altruism to do the most good in the world. More recently, we've had the example of Sam Bankman-Fried, who has also made billions doing an earning to give strategy in crypto. And then it's also the case that it seems like people have had like extraordinary successes in other spheres as well. So we've had, Toby Ord, the author of The Precipice, being quoted by Boris Johnson at the UN, and also, the UN Secretary General being kind of interested in like the ideas of existential risk. And so there's been a bunch of progress, I think, across a lot of dimensions. And it seems like we should now maybe as a community take a bit of an update from that. It maybe seems like a small group of highly dedicated people can in fact change the world if they put their minds to it. And so possibly that should give people a bit of an update that, hey, if you really put your mind to earning to give, maybe it is possible that you can become a billionaire. Or if you want to change politics or change policy, like it is possible maybe for you to like aim high and maybe go and become an elected official or go work in Number 10 or in the White House or something like that. So I think that there's like, this is general vibe of actually possibly we can achieve more than you might have otherwise expected, and like maybe people should like take that on board on an individual level when they're doing some career planning.
Yeah, I'm curious if you can maybe like talk a bit more about like what that concretely means for people planning their careers or like thinking about their careers and such. Is this like basically should we take this as like people should take more risks with their career, because in expectation it will lead to like more good, because some of these like standout cases are like just so important or like so influential that this seems to be like what people should be aiming to do with their careers, or is it a case for like I guess like working harder or just like dedicating a lot more effort to their careers like as a whole, because they just seem to have like really high returns to like putting effort on these, like which of these, or like what other like lessons might there be here?
Yeah, good question. So I think one of the lessons that you might have is, we talked a bit earlier about how you might go about career planning, and maybe you make up a long list of different potential career paths that you could follow. There's one case that you might take, one approach that you might take if you wanted to really embody this kind of ambitious approach, is to think about specifically focusing on the upside option for each of these different paths. So just thinking about the what does the success story look like? What does it look like in the worlds where things go incredibly well? And actually pay quite a lot of attention to that specific scenario when you're kind of ranking the different things that you could do and picking which one you want to go in kind of all in on at first. And that might mean being pretty open to taking some more more uncertain options, more higher risks, go for things that maybe there's like a slightly smaller chance that it pans out, but if it pans out, it could be really, really good.
Yeah, cool. I guess one framing that sounds very similar that I really like is that if you're thinking about what's just best for you personally, then how good things can go kind of levels off quite quickly. So if you make like $10 billion, that's certainly not 10,000 times better than making $1 million. It's maybe like a few times better for you. But it is basically 10,000 times better if you want to spend the money that you earn on doing good in the world. So there's much more upside when you're thinking altruistically than when you're thinking from a kind of personal perspective. And so it requires a bit of a shift of mindset to really see that the upside is very, very high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that in your personal life, a real drive to make as much money as possible just like it's like not a very sensible strategy, because like you say, you just face these like pretty strong diminishing returns. And so it's just like incredibly sensible for people to not have this like drive to be as ambitious as they possibly can for their own personal goals. Like there's just like a lot of good reasons why you might not want to make a lot of gambles with things on your personal life. But if you are taking this kind of impartial impact focused perspective, it actually just seems like being open to taking higher risks just might well be a much better idea.
Yeah, cool. And I guess another useful framing is to think of yourself as part of this bigger community or portfolio of different efforts where, you know, in some sense, it's quite likely that a lot of them won't pan out. But if there's enough people, then some of them will. So it makes sense for the overall strategy for everyone to be like aiming at these really cool things rather than for everyone to kind of be risk averse and like doing the safe thing individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even better if you are able to put yourself in a position where you're trying like a somewhat risky thing, but if it doesn't pan out, you don't ruin your life. You land on your feet
totally.
And you have useful skills and you're able to try another thing again. And if that's the kind of position that people can put themselves in, then yeah, definitely as a community, it seems like we'll just do a lot better if people like feel able to take a punt on something that could be really amazing.
Yeah, I'm really like curious on what is like maybe like a fuzzy question, but like around like how the EA community and so can like support, I guess, like this more risk taking and like also taking seriously that like failure can be like really painful, you know, both in like a financial way, but like also just like in an emotional way of like, you know, that like presumably being really hard. And when we're talking about these like really risky or these like really like big like one shot events, like we should, you know, expect that like most things will end in failure, and we should like be looking to like maybe either like make people like less scared or like less worried about this in the beginning, but then also like thinking about like what we can do to like help people like have another go at things, or to help people like be like more aware that like failing is like also a right, because if you don't try hard enough, that failure is an option, and then you also don't have like that big like potential like upside either.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a very like unclear like what to actually do about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't have any great ideas on this, but it feels analogous to, you know, we can make a community culture where it's like socially good to, you know, change your mind on something based on new evidence. And in a similar way, maybe we can make a community culture where it's like socially good to have like tried the thing that seemed like it was worthwhile beforehand, even if it didn't work out afterwards.
I think there's something here as well of that failure could have still been the right decision, like ex ante. Like I often think about this, like in terms of politics and stuff, where like if a big bill has like failed because it fell like a couple of like votes short, then like the discrete outcome is like either you win or you lose. So like it's a failure, so the outcome is like zero. But like if it was like really close, then it probably was like the right decision to have like gone for this, as long as like the upside was like really big, or it seems that like in expectation it was like worth it. Even if like the outcomes can often be like very extreme or like even discrete or something. But I think that's like something that has definitely like helped me like think about it like more in like risk taking terms or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if across the community we're doing the right thing, we should expect some of our projects to not succeed. If all of our projects are succeeding, we're not doing the right thing. We're being like way too cautious. There should definitely be some times where it turns out it didn't pan out. And yeah, maybe we can try and do what we can to make the community like really supportive of people who give things a go.
Totally agree. Yeah, I guess one important question is, whether there are ways to kind of misinterpret this message about ambition. So what do we not mean when we say that there's a really strong case for ambition now?
Yeah, I think one thing is don't like go gung ho on projects where there's a really wide likelihood of like it could go really well or it could go really badly for the world. So we want to probably when you're thinking about options, it seems very likely that you should just be like ruling out options where if it goes wrong, it makes things a lot worse in the world. Maybe you want to be thinking mostly about options where the upside is really high, and then if it doesn't fail, then if it does fail, then things are not much worse than they are right now.
Yeah. That seems like a important like message to like really iterate that like the upside can be like really big, and if like the downside like is kind of capped at zero, then like that often like favors like risk-taking behavior, just because the highest it can go is infinity, but the lowest it can go is like finite at zero. But if it's like positive infinity or negative infinity, then or like there's only like a small difference here or there, then that's like maybe not a scenario to take the numbers like literally, especially if you're uncertain around those numbers.
Yeah, and I think it can be hard to find projects that only have a positive outcomes, I guess, especially because a lot of the things that maybe we're dealing with or thinking about are very high stakes things that might seem like it's hard to know exactly what's the best way for things to develop over the next few decades, or I'm thinking particularly about some of these like catastrophic risks or something. But if you can find the things that seem like robustly good to do, then trying to like ambitiously pursue those goals seems good. And there are ideas of this, and I think there's particularly an appetite right now in the effective altruism community to support people trying to do those kinds of ambitious projects focused on the robustly good things.
So I can imagine hearing all this stuff about being ambitious for the first time and thinking that it requires quite a big mindset shift from how I was thinking about having an impact with my career beforehand. And that might be quite difficult for me to like really kind of switch into that mode of thinking. So I guess, what do you think are the like psychological blockers to thinking this way, and how do you think it might be useful to like change the way you think along these lines?
Yeah, I super sympathize with this maybe being an off-putting message. I think it like can seem really scary. It can seem like a lot of pressure. It can seem like having to take yourself like really seriously and what you can achieve with your career really seriously, which some people might find aversive. It might even just feel like kind of icky because ambition maybe seems like the kind of thing that's associated with people wanting to pursue like personal goals and like achieve wealth and fame, and like doesn't really like vibe with you. And so there's like a bunch of different reasons that I think I very strongly sympathize with like people not feeling like they naturally would want to inhabit this space. I mean, to be clear, if people do find this just like straightforwardly easy to do, then great. But if people are struggling with this a bit, and I think there's maybe like some different kind of psychological like framings that people might have that could help with trying to like get something that you feel fully on board with, that you're going to be able to really buy into for thinking about your own career planning. And so maybe one cluster of things could be trying to put the moral framing back into the ambition message. So at the moment, be ambitious with your career is very much focusing on the instrumental goal of ambition. But maybe you want to bring back in the idea of like helping as many people as possible, or being as like maximally giving as you possibly can. And maybe that sort of sits better with people. An alternate thing you can do is actually just like focus in on the career goal element of it. And maybe people might find it motivating to like try and become like world class at a particular skill, or in a different way, maybe people might like having a specific kind of end goal, like, go work in number 10 or something like that. And like different things might work for different people. And then lastly, maybe there's like a class of different like ways you can hack your animal brain that you kind of find like useful psychological framings. Maybe this kind of scarcity mindset of like, I've got to use my 80,000 hours as best as I can could be like very giving you a bunch of driving motivation. Maybe just thinking about your own legacy or reputation and kind of looking back over your life at the end of your life and like wanting to have done yourself proud could also be like potentially motivating. And so I think I just want to encourage people to if you think that this is important, and if you buy the case that you should be ambitious with your career, then just feel like fully empowered to like hear that message however it actually resonates with you. And if one person is kind of telling you the message in a certain way, and that's like really off-putting, then it doesn't have to be the right way for you. There are like plenty of other ways that you can make this work for yourself.
Fantastic. Let's move on to our final questions. So maybe one like immediate question that some listeners might have is, suppose that they have a spare hour or two and don't fancy listening to another podcast episode. What do you suggest they do? Like what steps can they take like here and now to help them with their career, or to like help them about anything else we've talked about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shocker. I can't believe anyone wouldn't be up for another couple of hours podcast at this point. Maybe one thing might be to just like check out the 80,000 Hours website. I think maybe many of your listeners are familiar with it already, but if not, 80,000hours.org, and then click on Start Here. And that's a kind of article that takes you through a bunch of our key thinking about how you might want to orient towards thinking about your career and trying to have the most impact that you can with it. And after maybe, if instead, you're actually just very familiar with 80,000 Hours and are really on board with all of this project, but specifically want to work out what to do with your career right now. You can try and do the Finn thing of set a timer and see if you can try writing down some of your thoughts on a couple of the first questions. If you want to check out our career planning process, that guides you through some of those steps on the 80,000 Hours website. Or you could jump straight to applying for 80,000 Hours careers advising to speak with the team. So if you want to do that, then we have a special link for Hear This Idea listeners, HTI. So 80,000hours.org/HTI, just to go there to our page to apply to speak with the team.
I think that's the first referral link we've ever had. So that's very cool. Cool. And then I guess if people have like more time available, one of the questions we love asking is like, what are 3 books, article, films, or like other bits of media that you recommend listeners check out if they want to find out more about what we've talked about in this episode?
So if people are interested in some of the stuff that we talked about in terms of thinking about future generations and how disenfranchised they might be, I'd recommend a lecture that Will MacAskill did, What We Owe the Future, which is on YouTube, which I think he originally did for Harvard students. And it's a good way of, it sort of sets out his current thinking on this, which leans heavily on this kind of framing of representation, and is a good sneak peek of what I think is going to be in the book when it comes out. And then if people are interested in kind of career planning, on 80,000 Hours, we have a career planning course that's 8 weeks long, but there is a summary version that can give you just the headlines. That might be a really good thing to just like check out to get a sense of the different stages as we talked about them. If people are interested in digging into a bit more the case for being ambitious with your career if you're trying to do good, the rational case for aiming higher, then they can check out our article on that by Benjamin Todd.
Super. And very last question is, where can people find ADK and also you online?
Mm-hmm. So the 80,000 Hours website is 80,000hours.org. And then me, you can probably find me best on Twitter, where my handle is @freshmangolassi. That's spelled LASSI, as in the Indian drink.
Yeah, it's a really good username. Habiba Islam, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Habiba Islam on planning a high-impact career, different ways to be a long-termist, and the case for altruistic ambition. If you found that conversation useful, please do share it around with friends who might also get something out of it, or just share them on that link to apply for career coaching, which we have in the show notes. Also, if you want to help the show out in general, one of the best ways to help is to leave a review or a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. As always, if you want to learn more, you can read the write-up at hearthisidea.com/episodes/Habiba. There you'll find links to all the links and resources that were mentioned, along with a full transcript of the conversation. And finally, if you have constructive feedback, there is a link on the website to an anonymous feedback form. There's also a star rating form on the top and bottom of the write-up. And you can send suggestions, questions, and whatever else to feedback@hearthisidea.com. Thank you very much for listening.